He had waited years for the letter. But the moment it arrived, he couldn't feel it, because the man across the desk had already soured the air. And though everything Victor said was right, it came out like acid, and Dorian knew. Truth, spoken in anger, becomes a kind of poison. They'd barely finished scraping the rust off the bells when the letter came. A clean envelope, government seal embossed on the flap. Inside, the confirmation, accreditation, not provisional, full. After 12 years of blood-sweating grant applications, curriculum audits, and backroom bribes disguised as development dinners, the city's most forgettable liberal arts college, Gallon Ridge University, was now, officially, a place of consequence. Or so they hoped. President Dorian Mercier sat alone in the top-floor library room they called his office. A fig-scented candle flickered beside his inbox. He held the letter in his hand, like a bishop holding his own heart. The silence felt earned. Outside his window, the city coughed awake. Metro buses hissed. A siren called to no one. Sunlight lit up the concrete quad where students with minor ambitions chased dreams in hoodies and boots. Gallon Ridge students were not slick or impressive. Not yet, but now they were accredited. He let the letter drop gently onto his desk and closed his eyes. Then came the knock. "Come," he said, instantly regretting it. The door opened fast. Victor Lorne never paused before entry. A middle-aged man with the swagger of a brilliant bureaucrat and the grace of a fork in a blender. Victor ran student services and half the university by rumor. "Good news?" Victor asked, eyes already scanning the desk for the envelope. Dorian gestured toward it. Victor read the first few lines and allowed himself half a smirk. Finally. Should have happened years ago, if the board hadn't been so spineless. There it was, the note of bile. Always just enough to sour the moment. Victor sat before being invited, tapping his fingers on the armrest like he was auditioning for percussion in a band no one asked him to join. "We'll need to rebrand immediately," he said. "Website, marketing, social, and admissions. God, don't get me started. Our onboarding email still has the wrong registrar listed. You know that?" Dorian nodded slightly. "It's been a busy month." "It's always a busy month here." Victor snapped. "That's the problem. You let these people drag their feet like it's a monastery." Dorian said nothing. Victor leaned in. "Now that we're legitimate, we need to act like it. You want real applicants, real donors. We have to be ruthless about culture. No more softness, no more learning curves. We cut underperformers and promote the winners." It was not the first time Victor had said something like this, but something in Dorian shifted this time. Perhaps because the moment was sacred and Victor had defiled it. Or perhaps because the air itself felt heavier now, with the weight of recognition pressing in. "You may be right," Dorian said slowly, "but how we go about it matters." Victor stood up. "That's the problem with this place, Dorian. You think tone is more important than truth." And then he left. Later that week, a junior administrator named Julia left her resignation letter on Dorian's desk. No explanation. A few days after that, an adjunct professor reported that a promising first-year student had dropped out unexpectedly. Said something about a toxic vibe in the office. The professor said, didn't name names. But Dorian didn't need names. He already knew. Still, the words clung to him like damp ash. Tone more important than truth. He didn't disagree, but neither did he know what to do with the truth once it was stained by anger. He looked out over the quad, where the chapel bell now rang every hour, right on time. The clapper inside still had a dent from when it fell during the renovation. He made a note to himself in the corner of his notepad. The bell still rings, but does it sing? He tore the page off and crumpled it, dropping it into the bin. Then he scheduled a meeting with Victor Lorne. The conference room on the 4th floor was a leftover from an earlier time. Linoleum floors, acoustic tile ceiling, an old brass wall clock that lagged 3 minutes behind whatever mattered. Dorian chose it on purpose. Victor arrived early, naturally, laptop already open and cursor blinking on a spreadsheet of performance metrics. He did not look up when Dorian entered. Dorian took a seat across from him. No assistant, no agenda printed, just 2 mugs, coffee, black, and the sound of a building trying to decide whether it was old or new. Appreciate you making time, Dorian began, folding his hands like a priest too tired to preach. Victor didn't answer, just nodded. There was something surgical about his quiet. I've been thinking, Dorian continued, about the way we talk. Not what we say, but how we say it. I'm starting to believe it has a longer half-life than we realize. Victor let out a single breath of something close to a laugh. Are we about to have a values conversation? Dorian tilted his head slightly. Maybe. I prefer we focus on output. We're not a philosophy department. We're a university trying to survive in a city that couldn't care less if we disappeared tomorrow. Dorian nodded again, more slowly this time. And I think tone is part of output. Victor finally looked up. His eyes were flint. You're saying I'm the problem. I'm saying... Dorian paused. He felt the heat in his throat rising. The old righteous flame. It was his turn now, wasn't it? To speak justice with a clear voice, but he didn't. He remembered the quote, "You ruin everything when you speak with anger," and swallowed the fire. I'm saying the culture we build right now will outlive us, and I want it to be one that values clarity and care. Victor leaned back. Sounds lovely and inefficient. Inefficiency doesn't scare me, Dorian said. Bitterness does. A long silence followed. Victor returned to his laptop. Anything else? Dorian shook his head. Number. That's all for now. Victor closed his laptop without saving. Noted. He left the room with no sound but the clock's off-beat tick. Dorian remained, staring at the condensation ring under his mug. What was the goal of that conversation? To confront? To correct? To reach? He wasn't sure, but he hadn't raised his voice, and somehow that felt like the beginning of a win. That evening, as the sky pulled a bruised curtain over the city, Dorian walked the hallways alone. Faculty doors were closed, bulletin boards half decorated. Somewhere down the stairwell, a student's laugh echoed up and vanished into plaster. On the lobby table sat an old copy of The Republic, its spine cracked and bookmarked by a napkin. He picked it up, smiled faintly, and returned it to the shelf. He knew this place would never be a beacon, but maybe, with enough patience, it could become a haven. And maybe, not yet, but someday, Victor would understand that. They said nothing publicly. No announcement of cultural realignment. No email with bulleted values. Just silence. And in that silence, something began to shift. It started in odd places. At the vending machine in the East Wing, where two staffers paused mid-complaint when they noticed Dorian approaching. Not out of fear, but something else. Uncertainty, perhaps, and a question forming. Was he listening? Then, in the faculty lounge, when Dr. Maresh, chair of the English department, caught Victor dismissing a staff member's proposal with his usual steel-edged sarcasm. She didn't confront him. She simply walked out. The room, which usually shrugged off Victor's outbursts like a passing draft, felt suddenly colder in her absence. Victor noticed. In his own way, he always noticed. By the time the semester's midterm reports came in, Dorian had quietly reshuffled some responsibilities. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to create space. Space for others to rise, and for Victor to feel the air change around him. He didn't like it. "You're isolating me," Victor said during the next one-on-one. Dorian looked up from his notes. "I'm rebalancing the team. You've cut my voice out of key decisions. I've given others a chance to speak. And what exactly have they said that's so vital?" Dorian didn't answer. He let the moment sit. Awkward, heavy, unresolved. It wasn't meant to be resolved. Not yet. Victor stood. "I know how this ends." Dorian shook his head. "I don't." Victor hesitated. "Well, maybe I do." Then he left. Not with his usual clipped stride, but something slower, like a man trying to remember if he left the stove on. That night, it rained. The kind of rain that carves paths into dirt that wasn't ready. Streets slicked with reflections, the university's windows glowing faintly behind rivulets. Dorian stood under the chapel awning, umbrella closed, letting the water tap his shoulders. He didn't feel righteous. He felt uncertain. He remembered the first time he'd met Victor. Sharp suit, sharper tongue, a resume like a dagger sheathed in charm. The board had loved him, efficiency incarnate, but now the sharpness had dulled into something acidic, and yet Dorian couldn't bring himself to cast him out. Not yet. There was something tragic in Victor. Something unresolved. Behind the rain, a bell chimed 9. He turned to go, his coat heavy with water and restraint. The next morning, Victor entered the break room, while Julia, the one who had once resigned, was visiting. She had returned part-time, consulting on student mental health programs. She greeted him without flinching. He paused, blinked, then nodded. "Morning?" It was a single word, flat but uncoated. No bite, no burn. She smiled. "Morning?" He poured his coffee and left. Small, insignificant. But to Dorian, watching from down the hallway, it was a spark. Maybe not of repentance, but perhaps of weariness. And weariness, when received rightly, sometimes leads to grace. Victor began spending more time behind closed doors. Not sulking, working, quietly, but not coldly. There was a difference now. The edge was still there, but it had dulled, like a knife no longer drawn every time the light shifted. He responded to emails faster, but with fewer capital letters. His remarks in meetings came later and were shorter. Occasionally, he asked someone else what they thought. This astonished them. No one said it aloud, but the corridors breathed a little easier. Dorian noticed this, but said nothing. He had begun a practice of restraint. Not silence exactly, but something more intentional. He now treated words like old wine, poured slowly and only when the company was ready. In the margins of his notes, he had started writing phrases, not policies, phrases. Grace doesn't compete with truth. Correct without conquest. Let the echo be softer than the call. He didn't show them to anyone. Not yet. Maybe never. The university's spring symposium approached. A modest gathering of local thinkers, small press poets, and a few cautiously curious alumni. It was the kind of event that made no headlines but shaped the soul of the place. Victor had been scheduled to moderate one of the panels. Dorian wrestled with it. He could have reassigned it. He could have claimed conflict of interest or preferred a softer presence to represent the university, but he didn't. He let it be. The day of the panel, Victor wore a plain grey blazer. No pocket square, no pin. His notes were minimal. When the first speaker exceeded their time, he didn't interrupt. He waited for a natural pause, then gently redirected the conversation. He even laughed at one of the more absurdly academic jokes, a genuine laugh, the kind that slips past your defenses. Afterward, Julia found Dorian near the coffee station. "He did well," she said, surprised. "He did," Dorian replied. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "I think he's trying." "I think so too." Weeks passed. The bell rang with new resonance now. Not louder, not more precise, but somehow truer. Victor still had rough days. Once, he barked at a junior coordinator about a misfiled invoice, his voice echoing down the hallway like a slammed book. But he returned 10 minutes later and apologized. Quietly, not performatively. That night, Dorian sat by the window in his office. The city glowed dimly beyond the glass, 1,000 stories unfolding without witness. He opened his notebook and wrote one more phrase in the margin. "Some stones don't crack, they weather." He closed the book, not needing to underline it. Victor's fate was still undecided. That was fine. Not every arc had to resolve on schedule. Sometimes the work was simply to remain calm, clear, and still enough to not disturb the turning. And to know, with quiet certainty, that turning was a form of grace.